All right, I'm looking forward to spending 4 weeks in Baptist world with you. Ron, my clicker isn't clicking. Huh? All right. 4 weeks together talking about Baptist life. Tonight I'm going to do an entire semester of Baptist history in 45 minutes. So y'all have got to go hard with me. We'll have questions at the end. But I know that this is not the most exciting part of what we're going to talk about in the next 4 weeks, but this part is necessary background to understanding kind of the diversity among Baptists, how our Baptist churches are alike and different, how we understand Baptist life here at Second-Ponce. So we've got a lot of good ground to cover in the next few weeks. Help encourage other folks in your Sunday school class to be here, because this is an important part of our identity, to understand when people in the community want to understand what kind of Baptist church we are and why. To have some way of answering that will be helpful. So let's try to get some other folks here. We've also got John Roma here to answer the questions I don't know the answer to, which is helpful too. Y'all ready to go fast? Here we go. Catholicism, the first major tradition of Christianity. The Catholic Church traces its roots back to St. Paul when Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church." That's why the St. Paul's Cathedral is named what it is, because they consider Paul to be the first of the popes, and the tradition has grown from there. Although the structure of the Roman Catholic Church probably didn't start until about the 2nd century. To study church history at all is really just to study how many times the church split, right? And local church history is how many times did the church split. Eastern Orthodoxy split 1054. They split off and became the second great tradition in Christian life. They split for 3 reasons. They had some doctrinal differences, but and some problems with the idea of the infallibility of the Pope when the Pope sits ex cathedra. But probably the biggest difference was just socio-political. Different languages, different cultures, they just couldn't hold it together, and the Eastern Orthodox Church split. And then the Protestant Church, our tradition, started in 1517. We're going to talk about that some more. That handsome guy is Martin Luther. And the Protestant tradition starts when Martin Luther, symbol of a lot of unrest in the Catholic Church, nails 95 theses to the church door in Wittenberg, challenging the abuses of the Catholic Church at the time. It's Protestant because he was protesting, and that was the tradition. When the Protestants moved out of the Catholic Church, they were then just completely free. There wasn't a new tradition to join. It was just the Catholic Church and then kind of nothing. So there started to form traditions within Protestantism. And not surprisingly, a group gathered around Martin Luther, and I know this is clever, they called themselves Lutherans. They're still around. Also in the 1500s, the Church of Scotland formed, independent of anything else. We're going to come back to this one because this is our grandparents. The Anabaptists formed in the 1500s. Calvin, another church leader of the time, a group starts following him. That's the kind of grandfather of the Presbyterian Church. Wesley, the Methodist Church in the 1700s. You see that different Protestant groups kept emerging out of this kind of free-range tradition that was not beholden to any pope or structure. So once again, the church just kind of splits and splits and splits and renames, and all of these traditions come about. So this is happening in Europe, and so let's look at the kind of European spread among our ancestors. The Anabaptists, one of the groups that split off in the 1500s, were called that because Ana means again. One of the things they were holding to is that Christians needed to be baptized again, not just at infancy, but when they made a profession of faith. Now, all the Catholics had already been baptized at infancy, right? So they believed that once you make your profession of faith, you become baptized, and the church membership roles are not everybody who was just born and therefore baptized, but the church membership are those who have professed faith in Christ. Zwingli takes Protestantism to Zurich. It's moving around Europe. Different groups that broke off of the Anabaptist tradition include the Mennonites, the Brethren, but the Baptist tradition that's kind of our ancestry made its way to England, and they have these confessions that they gathered around in England. So, by the time, right before the Baptist tradition makes its way to America, these are kind of the distinctives of Baptist in England. Believers' baptism, and an understanding of the Greek word baptismo, which means to immerse. So this Baptist distinction was forming that Baptists were those who were baptized after they became believers, and baptized by immersion was kind of the distinctive that had coalesced by the time Christianity is making its move from Europe to America. Told you I'm going fast. Y'all want me to stop there for a minute? Any questions on that part? I'm trying to leave a lot of time for questions at the end, so we're good so far? All right. Let's go to America. The first Baptist church in America is in Providence, Rhode Island. I have seen it. It was built in 1636, and so the first Baptist pastor in America, Roger Williams. Anything about that church look familiar to you? All right. So that's the First Baptist Church in America on the left and Second-Ponce on the right. Our church was built in that meeting house style and built with direct architectural appreciation for the First Baptist Church in America. So that's not a newfangled architectural fad, as you can tell. Both of those have been around a while. But look how incredibly alike the molding and all of it. It's really a remarkable match. One of the distinctives of the earliest Baptist churches is that a lot of them were designed after the churches in England that the people came from. And the churches in England at the time, the Church of England tradition, had a split chancel, right? Do you see what I'm talking? What I mean by that is, instead of the pulpit being in the middle, most of the Episcopal churches today, you would have a pulpit on one side and a lectern on the other. So you see at the coastal churches, the first ones to settle, you see this First Baptist Church Savannah picture. Isn't that interesting? Their choir is actually over your head. They're sitting, I've preached in that church, and it's a little freaky to realize they're sitting right. And their tradition is a robed clergy. You see the two there have on robes and a split chancel. Why? Because the first Baptists who were coming, that's what churches look like. So when they built churches, that's how you built them. And you can see the same thing is true at First Baptist Charleston. That split chancel that went away mostly after revivalism, because revivalism declared kind of that the preached word is what is central, and so the pulpit needs to be at the center of the architecture.
And Doc, it looks like the pews have doors on them.
They do.
Well, I see that where somebody would have to go actually open it up and sit down.
Yes, Jeremy was noting that the pews have doors on them, and they do. You have to open, in early days, people had to buy their pew, and where you sat in that church was a marker of your financial distinction in the community. Yeah, not real wheelchair friendly, if you noticed, right? It's Melissa and I were in Charleston this summer, and that's the stock photo on the left, and that's the photo I took from my phone when we were sitting in the very back pew this summer. Melissa was so inappropriately dressed for worship that we could only sit in the back pew. Actually, she's the one saying, "We are not going to that church. Not looking like this." But we slid in for worship that Sunday, and you can tell that it is still in that style. So we've talked about Baptists making their way to the U.S., the First Baptist Church in Providence, Baptists settling along the coast. I'm trying to get us to Second-Ponce, right? We're going fast. So Baptists settling in Georgia. The first Baptist church built in continuous use is outside of Augusta, built in 1808. Daniel Marshall was the pastor of Keokee Baptist Church. Has anybody ever been to Keokee? I would figure. Yeah. Joy's been to the Keokee church. I have been there, and it's just about as exciting as it looks right there. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's why it has to burn down. I mean, a lot of churches have been lost.
Right. Yeah, because they burnt down because of the structure, right. The oldest Baptist church in the city is Peachtree Baptist Church. Most people would miss that on the quiz, right? You would think First Baptist Church would be the oldest. First Baptist Church is actually the second oldest Baptist church in the city. Y'all know where this one is, right? At Briarcliff and La Vista, it kind of faces the corner. Yeah, you know where it, right? It's the oldest Baptist church in the city. 1847. We're going to talk in a minute about the formation of the Southern Baptist Convention, but the Southern Baptist Convention was formed in 1845, so this is an old church. And it's just, 5 miles from us, maybe? Yeah. So now we're getting a little closer to the Second-Ponce landscape. Second Baptist Church was, to talk about the date in a minute. As I said, the Southern Baptist Convention formed in 1845, Peachtree Baptist Church, 1847. The very next year, First Baptist Church, Atlanta. And then, 6 years later, Second Baptist Church formed. They formed out of controversy. The location of this church was across the street from the Capitol, and it formed out of a controversy at First Baptist Church. It's interesting that it only took them 6 years to split, right? That's a part of our Baptist heritage. How long is it going to take to split, somebody get mad and go to another church? So 6 years after the opening of First Baptist, they had a fight in the church business meeting, and the fight was over music. The progressives wanted an organ, those liberals, and the more conservative members did not want an organ put in that church, and it became so contentious that it ended up splitting the church. In the church minutes around that fight, one of the members, apparently with red-faced, yelling, called the organ a devil's box of whistles. That's those darn liberals, right? Split the church over whether or not they would have an organ, and Second Baptist Church is formed in 1854. This is, of course, one of our grandparent churches, and I'm going to talk about the merger in a minute, but our heritage comes from two churches, one of them Second Baptist Church. And if you've noticed, when I serve communion out of that beautiful old communion set, the silver set, it is from Second Baptist Church. And what's the date on it, John? Is it? 1860, made in England in 1860, that beautiful communion set that I use. So out of our tradition of Second Baptist Church. Ponce de Leon Avenue Baptist Church was a planned mission of First Baptist. As Atlanta was growing north, the Druid Hills community started to come along. Give you an idea, the Ansley community was built in 1912 or so. So this is, in 1904, there was so much growth in that part of Atlanta that First Baptist Church decided they needed to plan and start and plant a mission in that part. So they bought the corner of Ponce and Piedmont, which is about a block north of Merrimack's, raised their $20,000 and planted this church. Then in the Great Depression, all of the churches of Atlanta and the South were in distress. So many of the men had gone up north to find jobs. The economy was a wreck. Paying to keep the lights on was a problem, right? Just to keep things moving. And so the pastors of Ponce de Leon Avenue Baptist Church and Second Baptist Church were friends and came together and thought, wouldn't it be a good idea if we merged these two congregations, put our resources together, we could manage this depression better if we did that. And in those discussions, L.R. Christie agreed that he would step aside as pastor and allow Ryland Knight to be the first pastor of these combined congregations. So this merger is, of course, Second-Ponce, and we talked about tonight, there's a meeting in the Ryland Knight room next Sunday for lunch, named for the first pastor of Second-Ponce. So in 1932, 90 years ago, these two congregations came together. They sold their property and bought this property, this new location. So let me see if I can figure this out. No, it doesn't really shine. So, all right, so this is the corner. That's not our where we sit. That building isn't. This is the corner of Wesley and Peachtree. Let me show, right. So this is Peachtree, and this is Wesley. They bought this empty lot. This is where the Catholic Church is today. And that building in that picture was the Georgia headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. That corner got redeemed. Our space, as I've heard the stories, our lot was used for parking, and the Klan headquarters is where the Catholic Church is today. You all know that I'm friends with Monsignor McNamee, and I invite myself to lunch at the rectory about once a quarter. I'll just send him an email and say, Frank, it's getting toward the end of the month. I need somebody to buy my lunch. And he'll say, all right, come on. But in the rectory, in the dining room of the rectory, is a picture, a better picture, of the Klan headquarters that the Catholic Church has now redeemed, which is a good story. But the two congregations of our heritage bought the corner where we are now, and Second-Ponce was born 90 years ago today. One of the rare things in Baptist life, we're going to talk more next week about how Baptist churches are self-governing. There's nobody who can tell a Baptist church what to do apart from when they meet in a church conference. One of the remarkable things is that in a 90-year history, this church has only had 7 pastors. If you go asking around, you'll find that that's pretty incredible. So I got us all the way to Second-Ponce in 20 minutes from what was that? From the Catholic Church to Second-Ponce in 20 minutes. Any questions on that part before I scoot on?
Who was the architect of the building?
John?
He was a graduate of Georgia Tech. He was a church member.
And what was the name?
George Bond.
George Bond,
He also
Georgia Tech.
was the architect of the Plaza Theater and that whole shopping center that's on Ponce de Leon.
John said he was architect of Plaza Theater and that place on Ponce de Leon. And yes, Jim Weldon, he was a Georgia Tech graduate. And it's still standing. Yeah.
Have they ever got all the pastors that are still alive? They got together like for a reunion at Second-Ponce? All the pastors are still alive?
About half are, and I suspect that that's going to happen. I've met with all of them individually. I suspect that's going to happen in 10 years because we're going to throw a heck of a party when this church turns 100. And I hope a lot of my predecessors are still alive. So let's talk about the Southern Baptist Convention. This is going to be part of our story together over the 4 weeks too. All right, so we already noted that the First Baptist Church in the U.S. was 1636. In 1814, Baptists got together to form the Northern Baptist Convention, which is now what we refer to as the American Baptist Convention. So American Baptists are mostly located in the north still. And if you were to move to the north, you'd have a hard time finding a Southern Baptist church to attend. Most of those, it's not a large denomination. They are still mostly in the north. So let me take a minute to talk about why Baptists would form a convention to start with. We've already said that Baptists are not tied to any ecclesiology. Baptists have no bishop, no pope. Every Baptist church is completely self-governing. So why not just stay to ourselves? The limitation of that is that there are things that churches care about that they couldn't support individually. Primarily, missions and education. There weren't Baptist churches big enough to support missionaries. There weren't Baptist churches big enough to build their own seminaries. So they came together voluntarily, right? Everyone's self-governing. They came together voluntarily to say, we want to pool part of our money so that we can support mission efforts and support theological education. That was first done at the college level in the mid-1800s, and then the seminaries. I mentioned that Triennial Convention, 1814. Talk about the split in a minute, but 1845, the Southern Baptist Convention formed. But if you look at all of the Baptist churches, Baptist colleges in the South, almost all of them opened between 1825 and 1850. Furman, Mercer, Wake Forest, Baylor, just go down the list. There was a big push after these churches came together and pooled their resources to open schools to educate Baptists and to deploy missionaries. But the Baptist split in 1845 over the issue of slavery, which means we have a not proud tradition here. The Civil War was going on, and so the Baptists split along those lines and formed the Southern Baptist Convention at First Baptist Church, Augusta. If you've ever been in that church, they have a beautiful stained glass sanctuary, and part of the stained glass in there tells the story of the formation of the Southern Baptist Convention. They are currently headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Post-slavery, in the South, a lot of black Southerners were also Baptists because they were in the tradition of the white Southern places that they were living. And so black Baptists started separating and forming their own denominational expressions, and multiplication happened across the Baptist landscape. This is a kind of a current snapshot of what those traditions look like. By far, the Southern Baptist Convention is the largest. It is about the size of all the rest of them put together, right? And you notice the American Baptists were first, and they are very, very small comparatively. There are a lot more Baptist traditions than I've listed. There's free-will Baptist and foot-washing Baptist, and I don't know what all kind of Baptist, but you go on and on and on and on and on. But I have highlighted here the two traditions of our church's story, which are the Southern Baptist Convention, and then we're going to talk more next week, the week after next, about the formation of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. The Southern Baptist Convention owns and operates these agencies and institutions. The International Mission Board, which for most of our life was called the Foreign Mission Board, headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. The North American Mission Board, for most of our life, was called the Home Mission Board, and its headquarters are here in Atlanta. For years, it was a building on Spring Street that overlooks the expressway. They've now built a much bigger facility out in Duluth, right across from, what's that venue? The Gwinnett Arena, right? Right across from the Gwinnett Arena is the North American Mission Board. But my understanding is that they're soon to put that property up for sale, or have already, because new working patterns, and it's a big building, and Baptists have declined. Lifeway Christian Resources, the old Sunday School Board, is headquartered in Nashville. And I mentioned that the Southern Baptist Convention headquarters are in Nashville too. The printing and mailing enterprise of Baptists were at one time so large, moving out Sunday school materials, that there was a conveyor belt underneath the Sunday school board that went under the city directly to the post office for mailing. It was that big an enterprise for a long time. Guidestone, former annuity board, the Religious Life Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. And the reason WMU is a different color here is WMU is actually an auxiliary of the Southern Baptist Convention. They are not owned, controlled in any way by Southern Baptist requirements and mandates. They operate separately but within Southern Baptist. And the SBC still owns Ridgecrest Campground. They had another, Ridgecrest, of course, is where we own a lodge near Asheville, North Carolina. But Southern Baptist also had a campground for years in Glorieta, New Mexico, and that one has been sold. I have time for a quick story. When I was young and pursuing ministry and asking questions, I was in my 20s. My pastor took me to meet a mutual friend who was working at the Home Mission Board, and I was getting my tour of the Home Mission Board. The president of the Home Mission Board at the time was away on business, and so we toured his office. I should have mentioned this to set up this story. The Women's Missionary Union headquarters are in Birmingham. So they said, fine, you can walk around Dr. Tanner's office if you like. So we walked around. The office is a beautiful office. It was clean. The desk was neat. And the host said, come, let me show you something. We opened a door at the back, and there was this little bitty office with papers everywhere where he actually did the work. He entertained people up front, and he did the work back there. He said, he has named this office Birmingham as a way of retreat. When he needs to do work, he just says to the front desk, just tell them I'm in Birmingham so I can get something done. I went the wrong way. The Southern Baptists still own and operate 6 seminaries. When I was coming along, the Gateway Seminary was called Golden Gate. Midwestern has always been that. New Orleans has always been that. Southeastern Seminary is where I attended in Wake Forest. The oldest of the Baptist seminaries is the Southern Seminary in Louisville. And the largest of the SBC seminaries is Southwestern Baptist in Fort Worth. It is the largest seminary in the world of any denomination. And this you will learn, if you don't already know, next week and the next week, that we have real connections to that seminary because one of my predecessors left Second-Ponce to be president of Southwestern. All of the pastors of Second-Ponce have graduated from one of those 6 seminaries. That will not be true going forward. And so that's part of the tease for next week and the next, that the landscape of Baptist life has changed. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. What makes, how are Baptists distinctive from other denominations? What do Baptists believe? How are we structured and ordered? And how is it that we can have a foot-washing Baptist church in North Georgia with a completely uneducated pastor and have a church just up the road that is Baptist and still has split chancels and a robed clergy and a very high liturgy? So how are both of those churches still Baptist, and what holds them together, and all of that we're covering next week. So I've come to the end of my little ball of twine. What questions do you have? It's been in the last 10 years, but pre-COVID, I'm guessing about 5 years ago.
Doc, was Rock Eagle over near Easton, was that ever a Baptist camp?
No, that was not a Baptist camp. But, so these are all Southern Baptist owned. Georgia Baptists also own camps, right? Camp Pinnacle in Clayton, for instance, is a Georgia Baptist camp. But Rock Eagle, yeah, that's right. It's a 4-H property.
Do you know where the original First Baptist Church of Atlanta was located? Peachtree's a long street, where?
Right. I only know the property beside the Fox.
That's the only one I know, but I'm thinking that would have been too far out.
I think you're right.
I think it was near the Capitol.
It would have been near the that would have made sense that it would have been near the Capitol too.
I think Peachtree sent the first one.
So for those online, the question is, where was the First Baptist Church located? And we're getting confirmation that it was also near the Capitol. At some point, they relocated to a property on Peachtree that's near the Fox, and then about 20 years ago, relocated to the upper end of the perimeter at what was the Avon building.
It was between 4th and 5th Streets on Peachtree Street.
Peachtree between 4th and 5th. We have lots of historians in there.
One of the reasons the Ponce de Leon Church moved here was because the First Baptist Church moved to Fourth and Peachtree, and that would have been too much competition, to be right in that same area there.
John is saying that because there had already been a church moved to 4th and Peachtree, that was part of the motivation for this congregation to locate as far out as it did.
And when they were selling, when they tore down, when they demolished First Baptist, I remember they got bricks, and they sold bricks to people for souvenirs.
When they tore down the First Baptist building that was near the Fox, they sold bricks away. We'll also mention that that when this church was formed and built, it was one of the most unusual parts of the early days of this church is that most churches build first a chapel for the small congregation to meet in, and then raise the funds to build a larger sanctuary. There are certainly others, but this is the only church I know of that didn't build the chapel first. They built the foundation for the sanctuary and dug out underneath. And the sanctuary, the first sanctuary, was in what is now the choir room. It was the empty space under the foundation for where the sanctuary would be built. And early worship and Sunday school classes happened underground with just this blank slab on the ground till they could get the money to build this beautiful building. Yeah.
I have a question. I think you said Wake Forest is a Baptist college?
Yes.
So if you go to Wake Forest and you want to be a Protestant minister, they don't offer classes in there? They just offer Baptist classes?
The question is, Wake Forest is a Baptist school, so do they just offer Baptist classes and not Protestant classes? I'm trying to give a short answer to a long story. The Baptist colleges that I went through, Furman, Mercer, Wake Forest, Baylor, so forth, they all opened in a Baptist heritage as Baptist schools. Very few of them are still tied to the Baptist Convention. They were not part of the Southern Baptist Convention, right? I gave the whole list of the Southern Baptist Convention's agencies and institutions, but they were part of the state Baptists. So when I was coming through, help me if I miss one, the Georgia Baptist Convention owned Mercer and Shorter and Bruton Parker, and Truett McConnell, and the Baptist College of Nursing. Did I miss one? Yes, and Tift. I mentioned Shorter, I missed Tift, right. So Berry was not. So the Georgia Baptist Convention started and owned those. Most of those are no longer in the control of the Georgia Baptist Convention. They had to cut ties over intellectual freedom. So as the Georgia Baptist Convention got more and more conservative, they wanted the Baptist institutions to only teach in this lane. And under the heading of academic freedom, my university president would say, you can't be a great Baptist college if you're not a great college. Academic freedom's got to be at the center of that. And so Mercer, Wake Forest, Furman, those schools are no longer Baptist apart from tradition. Others?
You know, if Second Baptist, they split away from First Baptist?
Yeah, that was the one that split over the organ.
No, I thought that was Ponce de Leon.
That was second. Ponce de Leon was the one that was a planned mission of First Baptist. When they noticed the population growth in that part of the city, First Baptist said we ought to plant a church up there. Yeah. Others? All right, we're going to mix it up big time next week. Let me give a little preview of what we're planning to do next week. First, we're going to talk about what Baptists believe. And let me give you the short answer tonight, in case some of you are not here next week. I want you to know this part. Anytime you hear somebody say, well, you know Baptists don't believe in X, or you know that Baptists believe so-and-so, they are mistaken. Because what this local congregation chooses to endorse and what the one next door chooses to endorse may not be the same thing. And we're going to talk about the freedom of the individual in that process too. But anytime you hear, well, I know that Baptists believe, the answer is no, that is not right. So we're going to talk about that part. So what are the distinctives that hold Baptists together? And then we're going to talk about the two traditions that made Baptists diverge, which is a highly educated tradition that most of our First Baptist churches are a part of, and a revivalism tradition of Baptists that most of our rural churches are a part of, and how those two different traditions have flavored all of Baptist life in the South. So that's what we got next week. Do I know of any snake handling Baptists? I know that there are some. I do not know them, but and not getting real close. But yeah, up in Appalachia, there are. In fact, Bill Leonard, as I recall, has written a book about a snake handling Baptist tradition in Appalachia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tom just offered to wash your feet. That does foot washing, yeah. Good. All right, then I yield back the balance of my time. Go in peace.